This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 290 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's a bit of a mash-up episode. I want to give you a trip report from my stay in Kununurra a few weeks back, but also to celebrate 7 years of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. So here goes. Before we start, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast, and also pay my respects to the traditional owners of the East Kimberley, the Mirrawong people, because of my reference to Kununurra coming up. But before we get to the Kununurra trip part, I want to just say, basically, happy birthday to my podcast. It turned 7 over the weekend on Saturday, and 7 years of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast seems like a really long time. It's more than half of my son's entire lifetime, which seems like a long time to me. And it is longer than the average podcast. I actually just checked some more recent stats, and according to some 2023 podcast stats, there's a sad fact, apparently, that 44% of podcasts have fewer than 3 episodes. So nearly half of podcasts really only have 1 or 2 episodes. Poor things. And apparently there are only 720,000 podcasts with more than 10 episodes. So that's actually not many. And of those, only 156,000 podcasts are releasing a weekly episode, like I nearly always do for the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. So that actually makes it sound like there's not that many, which is kind of weird. But also good, I guess. Anyway, people often ask me what's kept me podcasting for so long, and they also often want to know whether I make a good living from it. Let me assure you, I do not make a good living from it. I definitely couldn't pay my mortgage from it, especially if you're in Australia or probably anywhere, with all the interest rate rises we've had recently. Definitely couldn't pay my mortgage. But there's so many reasons that after 7 years, I am still running the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. And okay, yes, there's a small income stream from it, but the main reason is that I love it. But it's also given me lots of really amazing opportunities. And this is, I think, what I've often not shared. But, you know, because I've experienced or been an experienced podcaster, I suppose, for 7+ years, I'm often asked to run workshops about podcasting in many kind of, like, for many reasons, for many audiences. I've actually just been asked to work at the uni that I teach casually at to teach a podcasting unit. So that's a bit exciting. And apparently they're hoping to kind of expand their podcast teaching offerings. So I'd be happy to be involved with that. Another really cool opportunity that podcasting gave me, or has given me and continues to give me, I started doing this last year, working with the Creative Schools program here in Western Australia, which means that for 2 terms a year, I'll spend a couple of hours a week in a school working with, it's a pretty long, complicated story, but basically working to help kids be more creative. And the reason that I was picked up to work in the Creative Schools program is because of my podcasting. So because of that kind of creative outlet. So without that, I wouldn't have been able to get that really fabulous gig that I really love doing. And all sorts of other opportunities. So one that I do want to mention, because it's kind of time relevant, is that I've managed to put a panel together to pitch to be at South by Southwest conference in Sydney later this year. So I'm sure many of you, especially American listeners, will know all about South by Southwest. And there's going to be a version of it in Sydney this year. So if you happen to be, I think you'll have to be Australian, but watch my social channels and check. If you happen to be listening to this before the 11th of April 2023, then you can actually come along and vote. So one of the parts of the South by Southwest selection for conference kind of talks, and in this case it would be like a live podcast recording, is that they do canvass community support for the idea. So it's not like you have to vote to be the best to get it. They also have other parts to their judging, but you can come along and vote for the the panel that I've been putting together. So just go along and there's a link in the show notes, or if you come across it by the South by Southwest Session Select voting, and look for the panel called Why We Need Travel More Than Travel Needs Us. So thanks in advance for that. Now, I asked in the Facebook group for ideas for this special 7th birthday episode, and there were some great suggestions. As always, I love my listeners. You guys have lots of really cool ideas. So one was from Jane, who suggested, well, we think there's 7 continents, so a story from each, which is a great idea. But the first thing I thought of was all of the arguments I've had in English as a second language classrooms when I've been teaching over the years, because it depends. It's a kind of a cultural difference as to how many continents we think there are. So I know some of you will be listening from other parts of the world and you might think there are 5 continents. Some will think there are 6 continents. We're taught there are 7 continents. And yeah, actually, it's all a matter of perception. Who knows? There's no definitive answer. So anyway, I'm not doing that one. I also loved the suggestion from Janet to describe the 7 deadly sins for travellers. That seemed to go with the number 7 quite nicely as well for my 7th birthday. So I'm going to list my 7 deadly sins. Actually, the first 5 are what Janet suggested because I completely agree with them, and I've added a couple. So 7 deadly sins for travellers. 1, litter. Don't litter. 2, disrespect of local customs. Don't do it. 3, wasting water. Totally agree. 4, another deadly sin is not bothering to learn any words at all of the local language, not even please or thank you. Absolutely essential. Number 5 was never going off the beaten track or only visiting tourist hotspots. It's another sin, I agree. And then the 2 I added to Janet's list were number 6, not learning anything about your destination before you go, like not reading anything, not watching a film or a doco or, anything that's connected at all, even a soap opera set in that destination, not having any kind of background to it. And number 7, my 7th deadly sin for travellers is never going beyond your comfort zone, because that's where all the cool stuff really happens, isn't it? I was actually giving a talk today and I was forced to reminisce about the time that I went really far beyond my comfort zone and took that microlight flight over the Ningaloo Reef. Still terrifies me to think about it, but it was worth doing. It was well beyond my comfort zone. Now, the other great suggestion that I had was from Christina, who suggested the 7 most popular segments, and I thought it would actually be interesting to check in my stats to see over the whole 7 years of the podcast, which episodes were the top 7 most listened to episodes. So I've done that because I think it's kind of interesting. Now, the number 1 most listened to doesn't surprise me. It's episode 1, Food in a Foreign Language. And that's because a lot of people, when they discover the podcast, they then go back and start listening from number 1 again, which is also why in sixth position, episode 2, The Terror of Getting Lost, also shows up. So that accounts for 2 of the top 7. But the rest of them, I guess, are a bit more random. A fair few of them are newer episodes, which I guess is, as the audience has grown more, there are more people listening to the newer episodes. But in second spot was, a long time back, episode 148 on solo travelling. So obviously a lot of people are looking to listen to episodes about solo travel. Then comes episode 272, Travel Gives You Confidence. I love that that's that's the 3rd most listened to one because it's such a great part of travel. The 4th most listened to episode is episode 270 called Post-Pandemic Travel, What Will Change? This was just me kind of rambling on, hopefully rambling in a thoughtful way, about, what we kind of thought early in the pandemic, some of the revelations we had and, whether we could actually, make travel more thoughtful as a whole. I actually might do a follow-up to that episode soon because now time has marched on a little bit further and, yeah, I don't know. I'm in 2 minds. I'll get back to it. Anyway, the 5th most listened to is 259, Being Less Tourist, More Traveller. Apparently this one's popular too. And then back to episode 2. And finally, rounding out the top 7 is episode 258, Making Connections When We Travel. So it's an interesting mix, and I'm not really sure why those particular episodes have been the ones that have been most downloaded. Maybe they've been shared more widely, or I guess the topics are of interest, but I've got, other episodes with similar topics, but there you go. So that's the top 7 episodes over 7 years. Anyway, thank you everyone who's wished the Thoughtful Travel podcast a happy 7th birthday. It's always nice to celebrate, and I'm kind of looking forward to the 10-year anniversary. Maybe it'll involve a really massive trip. Actually, it will have to. So the way I always remember the birthday of my podcast is I launched it on my 40th birthday. So when the podcast turns 10, I'll turn 50. So it'll need a very big trip to go with that. All good. Okay, so for the second half of this episode, as I promised, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about my recent trip to the very, very northern part of Western Australia. I went up to Kununurra, which, let me explain where Kununurra is. It's in the East Kimberley. It's almost as far as you can go and still be in Western Australia. If I was going to drive, I checked the maps. If I was to drive, it's 2,900 kilometres around about from my place, 34 hours of driving, according to Google Maps. I did not drive because I was going up for work to run some workshops for the Tourism Council of WA, and they flew me. Thank goodness. It's about a 3 and a bit hour flight, which is, quite far to still be in the same state, I think. Think about where you are, especially if you're one of my European listeners. If you fly for 3 hours, you will definitely pass over many countries, but I will still be in my own state. It's actually only 45 kilometres from the Northern Territory border, though, so it's nearly not in Western Australia. Anyway, I'd never been up to Kununurra before. It was pretty exciting to go. It's a place that I've known about all my life. My mum's friend's brother lived there, maybe still lives there, I'm not sure. Lost track over the years. But he used to send us mangoes down from Kununurra every summer. And no, not summer. What season do mangoes come out? Oh, maybe summer? I don't know. He used to send them down, and we used to eat a lot of them when I was a kid. So that was the mystery of Kununurra to me. Anyway, I'd never been there, and it's pretty far and, not very cheap to get there. So it was a great chance when I was sent up there to run some workshops. As you know, I always try to stay longer when I'm on a work trip, try and adopt those slow travel method. But I couldn't this time. I had literally just walked in the door from Sydney, and I had to get back to Perth for some other work. So I just had 2 nights up there, but I made the most of it. So before I'd arrived, I knew that, of course, it was the end of the wet season. It's the off season for tourism. So nearly no tour operators had started up. I knew I wouldn't be able to get out too far. I will definitely have to go back and do some more of the amazing things you can do in the Kununurra region. But I still managed to, you'll see, I kind of almost crazily made the most of it. So I arrived one evening, and then the first morning before my workshop, I got up at 5 a.m. because I decided I was going to climb Kelly's Knob Lookout, which is just on the outskirts of town. Kununurra is only a small town, so it was a couple of minutes drive. And this is a beautiful, beautiful climb. It's steep, but, perfectly doable, up to, a beautiful spot overlooking the town. It took me, I don't know, probably a half hour to climb up, but I did stop frequently along the way, and I was lapped by some locals who were younger than me, let's say, but also they were running rather than walking, and I was panting, not just walking. I was it was steep, but they were just basically jogging up and down. They did 3 laps. I was very impressed, but anyway, I kept stopping and looking, and you could see out over the town. You could see out to some of the countryside is just a combo of, especially at this time of year at the end of the wet season, green and red. So the red rocks and otherwise this kind of lush tropical kind of feel to it. You could also look out over Lake Kununurra and the Ord River, was absolutely divine. So I really loved that. Went back and taught one of my workshops, which was always great. So these workshops are with local tourism operators, helping them to use social media better to make sure they promote their business as well. So always lots of fun. And then I had an hour and 5 minutes between one workshop and the next. So my lunch break essentially. And I was so determined to see as much as I could. So this time I very quickly got changed. The workshop was being held in my hotel. So I could very quickly get changed, hop in the car. And this time I snuck out to Miramar National Park, which is also just a few minutes drive. So it was very, very easy to do this. And also just absolutely gorgeous, red rocks everywhere, and boab trees and, beautiful. So I only had time to kind of do the walk around at the ground level. There's also, you can climb and get some other views, but I didn't have time to do that. I did have to get back for an afternoon workshop. It did rain while I was there, even though it started off sunny, and it made me laugh because that morning in the workshop I'd said to my workshop participants, I'd looked out the window and I said, it looks sunny, it won't rain today, will it? And they just all laughed at me like I was such a non-local because they knew it's the wet season, anything can change, it'll change 10 times in a day. And I was like, right, they were correct. Anyway, went back, got changed back out of my wet clothes, luckily, in time to get into the afternoon workshop. Now, in the evening, we were extra lucky. There's this great venue on the water on Lake Kununurra, and several people in Perth had said to me, if you're going, you've got to go to the pump house. And when I got there, I learnt that it actually had been closed for 18 months. It was due to open imminently, but thanks to some delays from roads being closed due to flooding and stuff, it actually hadn't quite got to be open. But because they'd hoped it would be open, they had managed to persuade them that they would be able to hold our Tourism Connect, our kind of networking event there in the evening. So it was open and I got to have an evening out at the pump house, watch the sunset over the lake. Actually, since I've come back, I did see a photo from their social media showing a crocodile in the water right next to them, which freaked me out a little bit. I know some of them are just freshwater, so they're, not especially dangerous, but still, me and crocs don't mix. Anyway, there was none there I'm sure they were nearby, but I couldn't see any when I was at the pump house, and it was great. So that was that evening. And then because I really wanted to make the most of my time up there, who knows when I'll get back up that far, I had a few hours before my flight home to Perth, and I got up at 5 a.m. again and drove out to the Grotto, which is on the road towards Wyndham, about halfway towards Wyndham, an hour or so drive, I think. I'd been told there was a waterfall running out there, and it was a million times worth the drive. It was just absolutely stunning. So there was I guess it's almost like a gorge where you could walk down or climb down some steps into a swimming hole at the bottom. I didn't go down there because it looked, there was water everywhere. I think it would have been quite slippery for me. And I was out there fully alone, and I was kind of having these images of not turning up to the flight and my poor Tourism Council colleagues knowing something terrible had happened to me. They did know where I was going. But so I just walked around the top level, but that was absolutely stunning. And it was overcast when I got there, and I took all these photos. And then just as I was sort of thinking, maybe I better get back in the car and start heading back to Kununurra, the sun came out and everything was a different colour. The red rock were kind of shining and the green was so vivid. And so I took a bunch more photos and absolutely just loved it out there. And on the drive on the way back, I kept stopping, pulling off the side of the road because there was just gorgeous views as well. So the boab trees they're so scenic against the backdrop of the red cliffs, or just absolutely stunning. I could rave about it forever. It's the kind of scenery that literally gives me goosebumps or makes me I don't know if it's just me. Sometimes it just makes me want to nearly cry because it's so beautiful. Actually, if you want to see some more, I've got some videos and some photos on my Instagram in the posts, quite a lot. So have a look at them. My Instagram is just at Amanda Kendall, AmandaKendle. Weird spelling. So please go and have a look and enjoy those. I certainly thoroughly enjoyed that trip. So I hope that this weird mishmash of an episode has been interesting to you. Happy birthday again to my beloved podcast. I'm so excited that we've reached 7, and here's to plenty more. And also, another great trip up to Kununurra. I loved every minute of it. I'm kind of stuck in Perth for a little bit now because I've got lots and lots of work to be done here. So it might be the last trip report for a couple of months or a few months even. We'll see. Who knows? Who knows what excitement might come up. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to episode 290. In the show notes, I'm going to leave a couple of links. I'll leave a link to my Instagram, but also to the South by Southwest Session Select voting in case you listen to this before the 11th of April. And just look for the Why We Need Travel, More Than Travel Needs Us panel and give us a vote. Don't forget also the Facebook and LinkedIn groups for thoughtful travellers. They've been building up lately. So thanks for everyone who's coming along to join, and we'll have more and more cool discussions there in the coming months. And of course, all of this is at the show notes, which will be at notaballerina.com/290. As always, and really always, over 7 years. Thank you so very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.